It was a cold, rainy day in September of 9 AD. Fog and drizzle enveloped 3 Roman legions and their followers as they crossed the dense, rugged Teutoburg forest. Arminius, under the command of Varus, the governor of Germania, and his officer, who was also the commander of the Cherusci, organized the expedition toward the Roman winter quarters. The column extended from the vanguard to the baggage wagons at the rear. The long column advanced slowly. No one suspected the thousands of eyes hidden among the foliage, hidden beneath nature's cloak, following every move. What followed is generally considered one of the most decisive battles in history. At the turn of the millennium, Tiberius and a number of Roman commanders led brutal campaigns north of the Danube River. The goal was to subjugate the poorly organized Germanic tribes living in the region. In 7 BC, Rome incorporated the region into the empire as the province of Germania. However, subjugating the tribes proved difficult, particularly due to the lack of a central administrative authority controlling the region. This is not to mention the tribes' aversion to taxes and their general distrust of the Romans. At the time, the region comprised about a dozen major tribes and many smaller ones. Some, such as the Batavians and Cherusci, were staunch allies of the Romans. Others, such as the Marcomanni, were forced to ally with Tiberius. This required relentless military campaigns, but around this time, this new province seemed well on its way to becoming fully Roman. When the tribes launched a large-scale revolt in Illyricum in 6 AD, Tiberius left Germania with 8 of the 11th legions stationed there. The legate, Publius Quinctilius Varus, was appointed its first official governor. Varus, a renowned administrator who had served as governors in Africa and Syria, seemed the right man for the region. An ancient source summarizes his rule of Syria as follows: "He entered a rich province poor and left a poor province rich." With the strength of 3 legions and cavalry and a similar number of local auxiliary units, his army remained a formidable force. In addition to military might, the Romans had a bargaining chip. It was common to ensure tribal loyalty, or at least subservience, by bringing the sons of chieftains to Rome and educating them in the Roman manner. These boys became soldiers and, if talented, leaders. Among these boys was Arminius, the son of the Cherusian chieftain Segimir. Velleius's description of Arminius survives. A noble young man, strong-willed and far more intelligent than any ordinary barbarian, the ardour of his face and eyes betrayed a zealous spirit within him. He had fought with us in previous campaigns and had obtained Roman citizenship. He had even been raised to the rank of equestrian. Arminius displayed remarkable military talent, and he distinguished himself by helping to crush the revolt in Illyricum. Varus achieved a prominent position, and his next task was to help Varus maintain control of the new province of Germania. Once in the province, Varus resolved to become the new leader of the Cherusians. He married Thusnilda, the daughter of the former Cherusian chieftain Segestus. Although Segestus was a staunch Roman ally, sources indicate that he opposed the marriage, and animosity between them grew after their elopement. Varus trusted Arminius completely. However, his protégé was plotting a Germanic uprising behind his back. This was a daunting task, as the tribes were not organized and were often traditional enemies of each other. Although his exact motives are unknown, several factors may have caused Arminius's displeasure. Some suggest that he wanted to return to Rome, but was forced to take command. Other reasons include the heavy taxes on the Germanic tribes and the brutal oppression meted out by the Romans. As the saying goes, nothing unites a group more than a common enemy. Slowly but surely, a widespread uprising against the Romans began to take shape. Arminius ensured Varus's continued trust and reliance. He frequently asked the governor to resolve disputes between the Germanic tribes, satiating his ego. It wasn't as if Varus was hiding something. Segestus had betrayed Arminius at one point, but Varus paid no attention to the matter, viewing it as a family feud. When Segestus suggested that Varus keep both Segestus and Arminius in chains until the truth came out, the Roman commander ignored him. In the late summer of 9 AD, the campaigning season was over. Thus, the Romans began preparing for their annual journey toward their winter quarters on the Rhine. Arminius volunteered to organize the march, much to Varus's delight. While planning the campaign, Arminius informed him of alleged uprisings in the area. Given the size of Rome's army, they were easy to crush. To do this, Arminius suggested they march through the Teutoburg forest, a densely wooded forest with hilly and swampy terrain. Varus agreed, as he knew the area well and would surely lead the Romans in the right direction. Varus ordered scouts to ensure the pass was secure, to ensure they wouldn't fall into an ambush. However, these scouts were most likely Germanic auxiliaries who were aware of Arminius's plans. Nevertheless, Varus suspected nothing. Things went exactly as Arminius had planned. As the Romans made their way through the forest, it became clear that the terrain was not ideal for their military formations. The 17th, 18th and 19th legions, with around 18,000 soldiers, struggled through the narrow passes. Roman legions normally marched in formation, but they had no choice but to disperse and march in columns of no more than 2 or 3 soldiers. They were accompanied by approximately 10,000 camp followers, family members, merchants, and a long train of baggage carts. Archaeological evidence, mostly Roman coins, indicates that the Roman column stretched for 20 kilometers. Deep in the Teutoburg forest, Arminius left the column. He either informed Varus that he would gather more auxiliary units, or that he would reconnoitre the area. Confident, Varus continued his advance. Unaware that Arminius had gathered his forces, he did not do so to aid the Romans. Instead, he led between 20 and 30,000 Germanic warriors gathered for the final confrontation. The Germanic peoples included Arminius's Cherusci, as well as the Marsi, Chatti, Bructeri, and many others. The Roman forces had to march through a narrow, rugged area between the Great Marsh and the Calchris Hill. Due to the clatter of their equipment, no one heard the rustle of the leaves, while thousands of invisible eyes followed them. The Romans had passed the bottleneck. The vanguard passed without incident, but with part of the army in front and a huge row of baggage wagons behind them, there was no room for manoeuvre in this densely packed position. However, no one suspected that their every move was being monitored. Then suddenly there was a deafening crash. Trees fell across the road, the sky filled with a hail of javelins and spears before they crashed into the Roman columns. The damage from the surprise attack was immense. The legionaries struggled to hold their defensive positions as best they could, despite being bombarded with missiles. The first large cracks began to appear, especially since the infantry's armour was designed for close combat, not for penetrating shells. There was no heavy fighting yet. The soldiers panicked during the initial ambush, but there was no escape except north. Many fled into the swamp. With their heavy equipment, survival was almost impossible. In the rear, where the bulk of the army, the baggage wagons, and Pharos himself were marching, there was little warning of the disaster that awaited them. In fact, when the column suddenly stopped advancing, their initial reaction was to advance. This only made the situation worse for the soldiers trapped in the ambush. Then a deafening alarm bell sounded, announcing the attack of hundreds, if not thousands, of Germanic warriors. The already exhausted Roman lines held their ground, but luck was not on their side. Some managed to repel parts of the barbarian line. However, these soldiers soon discovered the wall built between the hill and the woods, putting them in a difficult position. Fierce fighting broke out in the narrow passage between the swamp and the hills as the Romans realized they were fighting for their lives. To make matters worse, it began to rain heavily. This made their heavy armour a formidable enemy, as their heavy equipment became soaked with water, hampering their flexibility. Nevertheless, the lightly armoured barbarians continued their lightning attacks, retreating into the dense woods whenever the Romans gained control. Hours after the attack, news finally reached Varus. He likely thought it was just a minor skirmish and ordered the rearguard to advance to assist their fellow soldiers. Meanwhile, up to 10,000 warriors were hiding on the eastern side of the Calchrissi hill. The Roman column passed this group of hidden warriors. As they passed, the Romans rushed toward the column, launching an attack similar to that of the Roman vanguard. Fierce and brutal fighting ensued. A combat zone stretched for several kilometers. The Romans split into the centre and rear of the column, suffering a similar fate to that of the vanguard, which had tried unsuccessfully to escape. Many drowned in the large swamp, while others were pursued by warriors hiding in the woods. As night fell, the Romans held out despite the carnage. Finally, a large portion of the army reached a clearing. Varus ordered the establishment of an improvised camp in the woods. It is likely that almost the entire surviving army was trapped in the woods. Arminius launched his initial attack. Familiar with Roman tactics, he knew that by fortifying themselves they could repel any attack. The night was quiet, and several supply wagons arrived at the camp. The next day, Varus ordered these wagons burned to speed up their advance. Once the Romans left their camp, the Germanic warriors continued their lightning attacks on the Roman column. Archaeological evidence does not reveal whether the Roman column set up a new camp or retreated to its previous one. What is certain is that during the second night and the third morning, the Germanic tribes attacked the Romans relentlessly. At some point during the attack, the cavalry defected. It didn't matter. They were all defeated or drowned in the great swamp. For 3 full days the slaughter continued. Hardly any Roman soldier managed to escape. Varus was betrayed in the most brutal way possible. Seeing his situation hopeless, he committed suicide on the battlefield. A classical source attributed to Publius Annaeus Florus described what happened to soldiers who surrendered. They put out the eyes of some men and cut off the hands of others. They cut out a man's tongue and sewed up his mouth. And one of the barbarians, holding his tongue in his hand, cried out, "This is what kept you from hissing, you snake!" After the battle of the Teutoburg forest, Arminius besieged Aliso, the nearby Roman fortress. The siege failed, but the Romans nevertheless abandoned the area. The loss of 3 legions meant that the Romans had lost more than 10% of their military strength. It was a devastating blow and an embarrassment for the most powerful state. It was the most significant defeat for the powerful empire, which controlled territory from the Iberian Peninsula to Syria. This defeat not only diminished its prestige, but also had dire consequences. Emperor Augustus dissolved his Germanic auxiliary bodyguard and ordered the recruitment of troops to counter any invasion by Germanic tribes. The defeat marked the end of the Romans' northward expansion. The Rhine and Danube rivers became their northern borders, but the anticipated Germanic invasion from the north never came. Arminius was unable to unite the Germanic tribes in the following years. However, the Battle of the Teutoburg forest was certainly not his last significant battle against the Romans.